Gene, thank you so much for being here, man. I'm a big fan of yours. I follow almost everything you do, whether it's the Shot of Digital Health or your other podcasts around DTX, and your work with your coach is fascinating to me. So, I look up to you in terms of what the trends are. How do we make sense of this crazy digital health wave that's going on? And it's really hard to prioritize these days. And thanks for coming here. It's truly an honor, man.
No, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Secondly, the comment on kind of looking up and learning. The reality is we're all learning, right? A lot of this is uncharted territories for all of us. And so this is part of the reason why, I do what I do with the Shot and the DTX podcast and everything else, just to continue learning and bouncing things off of each other as individuals. So.
Yeah, thanks for everything you do, man, for like the community. I think I speak on behalf of a lot of people. I've learned a lot, and I encourage everyone to follow your content. And like you say, collaboration is the new competition. I heard you say that a lot on your podcast,
Yep.
and I truly believe in it. And it's such an open and vast space, though. Let's play together, and that's the point of this
Exactly.
symposium today. So I want to start off by the same way that you start off with your DTX podcast. Like, tell us a little bit about your background and the stepping stones that brought you here today.
Yeah, so I'm kind of self-describe myself as a serial intern entrepreneur. So what does that really mean? I either have my own companies, or in the case of YourCoach, I joined my amazing wife in building this out. So it's still we're co-founders. Or I am in a large company, somewhat on stepping on toes with, on the larger environment where you could hide behind, emails and things like that. And I think the goal, especially us in the health and care ecosystem, is at the end of that is a patient, a consumer. And so we shouldn't be hiding behind emails. And so I love the intrapreneurial work that I do, and I'm back and forth. Just kind of peeling the onion. I've been in the health and health tech industry for roughly 20 years. The way I know it is my older daughter, who is a little shy of 20. She was born when I first started a pharmacy benefit management company. I've spent 10 years there. I joined a one-man garage show startup in doctor rating space, which we ended up selling. And then 10 years ago, roughly, with that big company, I came over to Amsterdam as an expat, kind of building a joint venture out with a German company in the space, and also health tech space. And then just kind of fast forward, prior to going back and working with my wife and building this, I spent some time in a pharmaceutical company, global pharmaceutical company. And that was fun. And where I joke around, I lost most of my hair, which is not true, but certainly it was quite an experience.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the breadth of experiences. So both being an entrepreneur and entrepreneur, I feel is really important for this next phase. And especially here in the Middle East, we're starting to look at both, ways of innovation. So both a lot of startups coming up, but then companies like Sanofi putting themselves out there and thinking, how do we change the model? And you have a background in Big Pharma also, right?
Yeah.
That's how I got to know you. And you led a lot of the digital programs for Bayer for quite a bit before you jumped and became an entrepreneur, right? So I'm curious to see again, yeah. and you also, if I'm correct, you started the Health 2.0 chapters in both New York and Amsterdam. If that's correct,
so back in the day, New York, then Amsterdam, then actually Dusseldorf, which as we were doing quite a lot with Bayer and the meetups, that wasn't sort of the priority, but the group is still alive to my knowledge in Dusseldorf. So 3 locations. Matthew Holt always makes fun of me that I think I've opened up more chapters than anybody else, which is it is whatever that's worth.
So tell us a little bit. You've been having so many conversations with interesting people on both podcasts. Tell us, like from a bird's eye view, what ideas about in digital health excite you the most right now? Like on a general level, but also like within the pharma vertical specifically.
Yeah, so I think general, I can keep kind of going and going and going, but I think the one key takeaway is that digital health is real. As a matter of fact, and I know that Brian Dolan from Exits and Outcomes and I would sort of joke around a little bit. If we each had a penny for the word, digital disappearing from digital health, that would be a good business by itself. But if you actually look at everything that we've seen in digital therapeutics and virtual care services and digital biomarkers, a lot of that is feeding just a new consumer. And notice I don't say necessarily patient, a health consumer experience, and how the models are changing of the engagement, and it's becoming a real businesses, right? We've seen acquisitions and just large M&As. We've seen large rounds coming in, and on one side it seems is it a lot of money going in, and some of these rounds we're seeing are just huge, right? But on the other side, if you look at our global healthcare system, where the spend is truly in the sick care, right? So can we get quicker to that individual, that health consumer? So that's at a broad strokes level. I think if we sort of start peeling the onion quite a bit and really focus on the pharma, I do think pharma needs to stop pretending that there will be real new business models overnight. Business models don't wake up every morning and say, I'm here. I think the reality is, pharmaceutical companies still have very healthy margins overall, and still, especially in the specialty. Now, I do think that if you're a pharma company and you're not investing into getting new drugs to market quicker and better and faster by leveraging technologies. And again, I don't want to use the AI as a buzzword. There are, 150 different technologies underneath, and that can be used. But at the end of the day, it's, again, leveraging technology, algorithms, machine learning, and many other components to ultimately get that drug out to that patient quicker. I think if you're not investing in looking at additional endpoints for your clinical trial that do involve, I'll say digital biomarkers broadly, then you're not doing your job. All right. On the complete other spectrum of things, and this is, and I'm sure we'll dive deeper into it, but kind of digital therapies. I think while there is a lot of clinical evidence and standalone digital therapies such as Akili for ADHD are super interesting, got a lot of funding. I think at the end of the day, if I'm a pharma company, I'm looking at this and saying, once there's real revenues, I'll just go acquire, right? Where I think the focus needs to be for pharmaceutical companies, and where a lot of attention, I think, people are playing around with it, but not sure how to really get it done, is this real drug plus combination, right? And not just a companion purely, but really an experience that can actually help that individual and patient and consumer. So I'll pause here if we want to dive deeper into any of those. But
yeah, so when it comes to clinical trials, we'll be jumping a lot more into it with other sessions. So I'm really interested in your experience learning about DTX and that voyage that you did with digital health today. And there are so many innovations out there, and the big question you keep asking them is, is pharma going to swallow DTX or vice versa, right? Or is DTX going to swallow the pill? I'm sure I misquoted you on that one, but how do you frame it, and how do you see pharma interacting with these innovations? Because it's I think the most exciting thing in digital therapy is that you can get to market, and you can it's essentially get the same amount of outcomes, but without years and years of molecular research, right? You can create an experience directly for patients. So how do you see it at play with both these kind of small companies innovating, large companies trying to do the same?
Yeah, so I mean, my first comment is large companies, and this is not unique to pharma, just don't know how to innovate, right? And it's a function of just large behemoths, right? It's a function of coordination. It's a function of the Dunbar law of 150, right? There's only so many, people that you can really interact with successfully. So I think, again, this is not a pick at pharma, it's just a large organization. And this happens in all industries, right? Like the fintech stuff being acquired by, everything from Bloomberg, et cetera. So let's not dive into that. as far as working with companies, I think, the key for any pharma company today is to understand where do they really want to play, given their portfolio, given their pipeline, and, make some of these investments real. And by the way, when I say investments, pretty much most, and I know Sanofi also has a venture arm, the more, I'll say, strategic and financial ROI investments, most pharma companies have those vehicles. What I do mean by an investment is an investment within the P&L, really committing to the work that happens by what I would call digital natives in these companies, that are, experimenting with things outside of the four walls, right? When you ask the specific question around kind of how do pharma companies interact with startups, but also digital therapeutic companies as part of that, which is, I think, where the eyes are. Right? I look at it in two ways. One, pharma companies have been scouting and looking clinical trials improvement space and finding, and prior to that, right? So even the preclinical and target identification, all of that. There's tons of technologies, tons of startups. And that's been going. I don't think there's been I don't know of a company or pharma company that really had like an exerted effort, kind of methodical around how they approach it. On the other side is sort of the digital therapeutic companies. And I want to make one comment a little bit. You kind of mentioned, well, you don't need to go for the 10 years and, for molecule development. If you look at Pear Therapeutics or Akili or even Big Health that does not work in with pharma at all and going more, I'll say, direct to consumer through the employer market, and one of the most studied companies out there, they're about between 7 to 10 years old, right? Now, it's not for product development, but it's starting to get to that commercial traction, which one would argue it's about 10 years, 2.2 billion, right, for drug development. But it seems like it's about 10 years to start getting the commercial traction, which in theory, once the drug is out of phase 4 or in the oncology space, obviously earlier in many cases, that commercialization is on that 10-year mark on both sides of it. I do think, we'll see what happens with obviously the vaccines were developed in record time and how that will impact the molecular development of the vaccines, and will others follow? So for other therapeutic areas, and that speed to market will happen. I don't know. We'll have to see. I am a big believer that on the digital therapeutic side, that iteration of R&D to commercial will be getting quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker as FDA and other parties, employers are seeing the evidence, seeing the data. And so pharma companies will need to adjust to that.
That's a great perspective to think that it still takes them the same amount of time. And I think the big value here is that it's an experiential behavioral health change rather than just a drug that you become dependent on. So it also creates that kind of value, which I think is really cool.
Yep.
And one thing I think about is that, when you start developing these DTX companies, a lot of the commercialization, I think, is starting to become a reality because of legislation. I don't know if you agree, but things like DIGA and FDA having a pathway. Obviously, in the Middle East, we have no pathways yet. The people still aren't even talking about it. We're starting to talk about how to regulate telehealth right now. So do you think entrepreneurs in the Middle East, and I know a lot of fantastic people that are working on DTX type ideas in Arabic for diabetics and so forth. So do you think it's a smart move to start working on them now, even though there is no path to commercialization per se? And, there's even investors don't understand it when you say DTX here. So
let me kind of turn this around on you in a sense, or not actually ask you a question, but I would say if you rewind back to when, again, I'll use Akili and Pear as an example. I mean, I think, both Corey, founder of Pear, and Eddie, founder of Akili, if they waited for legislation and if they waited, for something to actually happen, extrinsically, right, or exogenously, there would have never been a business, right? And so I think that's the definition of an entrepreneur, is actually paving the pathway for something new, and not just ideas, but actual implementation, right? And so my comment is, yes and yes and yes, right? Keep moving because the market is large enough. I know, as an example, obesity is on a huge rise, yes, in Middle East and globally. And from a metabolic disease perspective, from cardiometabolic, right? So then let's include the full spectrum of that. Our brains are not getting younger. We all are living longer. So from a neurological perspective as well. And so again, my comment here is if entrepreneurs wait, they're not really entrepreneurs. I would expect pharma companies to wait till something is there, right? To sort of enter the market, et cetera. And where I would encourage, the people in the room that are listening to this or virtually, is be the change agent, right? Be the change agent inside pharma because it will happen, right? It's just a matter of time. It just will happen. And so, do you want to foster those relationships early on and be the champion for those entrepreneurs? And yes, you got a business to run at the end of the day. And maybe initially look at some of those companies as new innovative channels versus a therapeutic intervention to start with. But follow the clinical and scientific evidence to get those entrepreneurs there.
That's an awesome piece of advice, and yeah, I'm right there with you. It's sometimes hard, and sometimes you need someone to tell you that, right? Um, and I think it really is an open field. Do you think DTX is kind of, or therapies that will be commercialized, do they need to be localized, or can you have entrepreneurs from this part of the region playing in markets like Europe or Asia or the States even?
I think the short answer is yes, right? I mean, I think we're all. I mean, there's absolutely regional, country specific. I'll say uniqueness, right? Always. But I would also say within a country, within a population, there are cohorts and everything is individualized. And that's actually the benefit of a digital therapeutic that ultimately, while absolutely from a study perspective, there are, RCTs you need to, follow and bring that evidence together. But the beauty of these digital technologies and software-driven interventions that they can get highly personalized, right? And as long as you're developing it that way, this should not preclude an entrepreneur in Middle East to selling and approaching to Belgium, as an example, or vice versa. Now,
Hmm.
of course, everything from language to understanding, honestly, even how business is done in the countries, from a regulatory framework, from security framework, from policies and procedures, that takes an exerted effort. And so, my comment to a lot of the entrepreneurs is, especially the ones that I've been sort of working with and talking to in Europe. Well, we want to jump from Netherlands to US, and my question is, what have you proved and have you scaled enough here? Because while the market might be much, much, much larger in US, well, can you capture 30% of the market in Netherlands, right? Just again, I'm using that as an example. And I think that way, then you're raising money either from potential customers, which is harder to do than from VCs. Kind of raising revenues is harder than raising VC money. But for international expansion, once you've proven yourself as a company in one country, I think the method to that madness, and I do say in a positive way, is always there.
Yeah. So you've touched upon different ways that pharma can start adding value to the patient and engaging with them. What about the physicians, the healthcare
Yeah.
providers, the HCPs that everyone can stop talking about? What do they need right now, and what's their role? How does it play out with digital health and digital therapies?
So, I mean, look, there's also a spectrum, right? We have it's a generational component of adoption, right? Because again, digitally native doctors that are graduating now, they do this in their everyday life, right? And so they're much more open to it. Where I think it gets sort of closed down, and this is why we're seeing lots of doctorpreneurs, meaning, right, they they get trained, they enter the system, and they're so frustrated because there are limitations. And at the end of the day, we are touching human bodies, right? And it is our health and ultimately happiness, and it all needs to be evidence-based. But I think there's a lot of frustration. So on one side, again, I think it's generational how you target those physicians and doctors and healthcare professionals and broadly. And you, just like you do that on the consumer side, right? You're sort of very targeted. You need to, doctors and healthcare professionals are also human beings. We always forget that, right? And so that personalized approach and what is it that is in their head, what spectrum they're at is going to be important. So that's one, right? So segmenting and understanding your demographic for the HCPs. Two, I think the default answer is host a webinar, send them an email, and start texting them and bombard them. At the end of the day, doctors take an oath, and that oath is dependent on the country, but generally is do no harm, right? And help the human being on the other side. What can you, as an individual, as a company, as a logo, do to help that doctor help that patient, right? And if once you start putting that lens on it versus, well, this is the packaging and all of that, which is also important, but put that lens on. And then three, I don't know if it's pharma specific, but doctors, they don't have much time either, right? And the reimbursement process depends on the country. Some are doing well, some are not and struggling. And at the end of the day, in order for the doctors to engage with something new, it does need to be reimbursed from a time, right? Just purely time spent on it. And so, what are some creative ideas that could help doctors and HCPs do that? And as an example, in Germany, don't quote me on it in the sense that I don't know how much is being reversed, but there are things that are happening sort of on the side of the DIGA around reimbursements for doctors to even understand and prescribe DIGA, because the reality is there will be the gatekeepers in a prescription market, right?
Yeah, and thanks for touching upon the idea that doctors are humans too. I think one of the biggest problems is that doctors are regarded as superheroes, right? And that's kind of the trap that we fall in, and that is the reason I burnt out. And now that it's coming out that, yeah, doctors reach a certain place of exhaustion where you just can't take it anymore. And sometimes we forget about that with technology. And technology has certainly played a huge negative role also in that. So hearing you speak about it, I hope the listeners start being proactive about putting no more billing machines and ways to take into account everyone except the physician, and we're exhausting that very precious resource. And one of the things that that's one of the things that drove me away from being a doctor, and I was able to maneuver that. But then the other topic that I know is common between us is health coaching, and I want to ask you about your perspective there, because that's a whole new industry. It's a whole new type of provider, right? But it's the relationship between the coach and the patient, I think, allows the provider to do a lot more, right? And allows and like you, I hate the term compliance, right? We want to talk about compliance, but it's really about also humanizing the patient through the health coach relationship with the patient, rather than that very limited time that patients get with physicians. So tell us a little bit about where that industry is going, and why is it exciting for you that you and your wife decided to create a whole company around it?
Yeah, and I'll do kind of 30-second background. So, and how this was even born. Marina, my wife, went through a breast cancer experience while we were living in Amsterdam. And while the system was fantastic, the doctors were amazing, they kind of forgot about parts of her body, mind, and soul. That's what she became a health coach, and realized that, wow, wouldn't it be great if you have a person to lean on, and not just myself as a caregiver, right, at the time, but an educated person that can help you understand and achieve and reach your goals. And that's actually sort of our premise. Our logo and Your Coach is a Hito, which is a person to lean on, right? And so that's a key component of that. Now, as an industry, and I've been joking around, you probably even heard me say this, it's been a little bit cuckoo voodoo. Is there's real science behind health coaching? And the industry has been around for 20 plus years at this point, and only since about 2012 in US there was a National Board of Health and Wellness Coaching that was formed to drive that as a profession with professional standards and certification. So in 2016, the National Board released a certification process which you have to sit for and pass the board exam. And end of 2019, American Medical Association, working with the National Board, actually issued, they're not reimbursable codes just yet, but they're called CPT Level 3 codes, which means it's out for testing to understand what's the viability of them actually being reimbursed. In summary, this is real, this is happening. Health coaches are absolutely becoming a more central, a little bit of a front lines, because to the point of, and you as you alluded to it, I don't like the word adherence or compliance, but let me use the health coaching word. At the end of the day is, how does that individual, health consumer, patient, even understand what their goal is? So when you're taking the drug, what is that for? How does that make you feel better at the end? What is that journey, right? Because, yes, some of them are quote unquote magic pills, like a Tylenol will maybe get you, or Aleve will get you a headache. But others take time and treatment. And how do you, so instead of saying compliance and adherence, why don't we name this as a goal for you as an individual to reach? And part of that goal and micro goals is taking your pill as part of that, right? But not only. So I think, again, in summary, yes, the profession is new. Your Coach, we now have over 2,100 coaches in the network. And that ranges from gut health to heart health to metabolic health. But again, the key component of health and wellness coaching, we always say a health and wellness coach is not necessarily a dietitian, but a dietitian, as an example, can get their health and wellness coaching degree on top, right? And it stems everything from motivational interviewing, and they're really change agents of behavior change agents, health coaches. One last thing I'll say on this, we've actually had quite a lot of inbound from pharmaceutical companies along clinical trials pathway, and helping, and I'm going to use the coaching term, helping those patients reach their goals during that clinical trial, but also similarly patient support programs, because obviously as the pricing gets more competitive, if you help those patients reach the goals, then from a reimbursement perspective, and you can at least hold the pricing, and especially in the specialty drug arena where the drugs are expensive around the world, not just in the US, I think there's tremendous benefits of that. But that's very early on, and I kind of joke around that we've been hanging up the proverbial phone, because we also know pharma does not really take risks. And so as a young startup, we're focusing elsewhere for now.
Great strategy. I have one last question, but just let me get my charger. Phone is going crazy.
No worries, man.
Can't get this damn green screen to work like I want it.
Well, you need the actual background behind you, right? That's how it works best.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have
I do have a background behind me. Yeah.
Okay.
But there's this area right here. This is driving me crazy throughout this whole thing. Awesome, man. We have a lot of really good stuff. I was gonna ask you a question that you already answered, like what does this have to do with pharma? But
Okay.
maybe, um, but you just answered it. Do you have more to say? Should I ask you that?
Maybe just you
Like
can ask like
something to
so
piece
what
it all together.
yeah, so like how so if it relates to health coaching, uh, maybe just like make it more concrete, like how what's the real use case there, right? And I can talk or something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I'll ask you that, and then I'll ask you for like any parting advice you have for either pharma or entrepreneurs. Close from there.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thanks for shedding all this light on this coaching industry. I think it's really exciting too, and I'm wondering if you can give us like some kind of use case that innovators that either on the pharma side, entrepreneurs, like you said, or entrepreneurs can really get a taste of what this life with health coaching is going to look like.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I like Imagineering, right? And let's talk about a patient support program. I don't want to pick any particular therapeutic area, but, for a patient that's just been diagnosed and new to therapy for, a disease that he or she will carry with them, right, for foreseeable future. Imagine, walking out of the doctor's office and getting a prescription for something, for a pill, and follow on office visits and check-ins, and you're just bombarded, convoluted. You now probably are sleeping less. If you were exercising because of lack of sleep, you might be. And again, I'm painting somewhat of a darker picture, but the reality is that's what patients do go through. So, and imagine that upon that script and that prescription or that part of the patient support program, yes, there is a human being on the other side as a health guide, but let's get even deeper that you get an actual health coach assigned as part of that. And that health coach as a non-clinical psychotherapist, that's how I sort of define the health coach, really tries to understand what's kind of in your head and what is the goal. And if you, as an individual, don't know that goal, how does that health coach extract it? How does that health coach extract your intrinsic motivation? Because ultimately, it's about that motivation for that patient to get up every morning, to take that drug, to go for that walk, right? And that's the key, actually, aspect of a good health coach, because nobody can give you motivation. It's inside you. And a health coach is very good in intrinsically, right, extracting that intrinsic motivation. And so imagine the patient is now, let's use the pharma term, adhering to that medication, and he or she or they are doing much better. And so that's a concrete use case, and especially on the specialty side, where again, a healthcare system depends on which country you're in, or out of pocket, there's money spent on it, right? And so how do you ensure the best outcome? And we do see health coaches, human beings, somebody with empathy to help you understand, put together, and help achieve those goals with absolutely support of the medical community, right? That's actually where it started.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I really second everything you just said, and I really think it's a game changer. So we've covered a lot of ground, and I'm curious to know what kind of parting words of wisdom or experience or encouragement, or maybe
Yeah.
more of the dark stuff that you would like to leave both entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs with. So both people inside pharma that are watching this and people that are in living rooms trying to change the world.
Yeah, you comment on dark side. I mean, I think we have too much dark side around us, so I won't go there, right? It's been obviously tough 2 years for everyone, the whole world. I guess just sort of on the positive side, if you look at the speed of the vaccine development, and I think pharma has had a bad reputation, and over the years, and always I think has been. The quote unquote trust pharma hashtag that was circling during iPharma. Once you say trust pharma, the trust even goes even further away. But here's what's sort of the light at that tunnel, and we saw that very quickly develop the vaccines are here. And this is because of pharmaceutical companies, the great researchers and scientists. And one thing that I would want to urge, especially people inside the pharmaceutical companies, is the decision-making process, which is highly top-down in many large corporates, but so much in pharma. There are brilliant individuals around the world inside those companies. Seek them out, search their advice, search through, and those intrapreneurs that are there, put them up on stage, not physically, but give them a voice. But again, make it concrete, because I also I think people inside these large organizations, look at, when the word intrapreneur are used, there's a lot of ideas. There's a lot of people that have ideas, and my question always is, ideas are great, but would you quit your job and go start this idea as a business, as a product, as a function? And many times the answer is no, right? Because again, ideas are cheap. The execution part is where you lose your hair, kind of thing, right? So I would actually encourage those intrapreneurs, if you're not ready to go out on your own, create a tribe, right? Internally. It's like pitching to a VC internally and fighting for that budget. If you believe in something that has value, continue fighting for it. So hopefully, sort of across the executive management side of things, as well as the intrapreneurs, and I'll call them digital natives that are around the world.